Welcome to the world of HFY Fiction Journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. Randy Stone rubbed his temples as he swiped through another holographic file. After a decade as an Earth lawyer and 5 years as an intergalactic judge, he thought he'd seen it all. The sterile white walls of his office aboard the Judicial Station Themis 9 felt like they were closing in after hours of reviewing case after case. Judge Stone. The metallic voice of Lex 338 cut through his concentration. The service droid's cylindrical head rotated exactly 27 degrees, an oddly specific quirk Randy had never managed to fix. Priority alert from Sector 7. The Galactic Rangers have apprehended the notorious space pirate known as the Azure Shadow. Randy straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. The Azure Shadow? The one responsible for the Centaur merchant fleet raids. Affirmative. The suspect is being transported to your courtroom as we speak. A tingle of anticipation ran down Randy's spine. Finally, a case worthy of his full attention. He stood, adjusting his formal black robes with the silver trim that marked his status. "Time to see justice served, Lex," he said. The droid's photoreceptors flickered. "Based on previous cases, there is a 99.7% chance you will sentence the perpetrator to execution, sir." "The law is the law," Randy replied, though something in his gut twisted at the thought. He pushed the feeling aside. Sentiment had no place in a courtroom. As he entered the judicial chamber, Randy took his position behind the elevated bench. The room was designed to intimidate, with sweeping lines of brushed steel and transparent aluminum. Through the ceiling, the vast expanse of space was visible. His bench faced a circular platform where the accused would stand, surrounded by a containment field. The door slid open with a soft hiss. 2 Galactic Rangers in powered armor escorted the prisoner. Randy's carefully prepared, stern expression faltered. The woman who stepped onto the platform moved with impossible grace despite her energy restraints. Her deep, mesmerizing blue skin shimmered in the starlight streaming from above, but it was her eyes that truly caught him off guard. Brilliant amber, sparkling with defiance and something else, amusement. She wore a standard-issue prisoner jumpsuit, but somehow made it look like the latest fashion from the core worlds. Every curve of her athletic figure was accentuated, and Randy found himself fighting to keep his gaze on her face. "Prisoner 7249, one of the Rangers announced, apprehended during a raid on." "Please," the woman interrupted, her voice musical and teasing. "Call me Niara." She fixed those unsettling amber eyes on Randy. Unless the great Judge Stone prefers to reduce all his subjects to numbers. Randy cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "This is a court of law, not a social gathering. You will be addressed as the court sees fit." Niara's skin rippled, deepening to a richer shade of blue. "My, how formal," she practically purred. Lex's voice chimed in helpfully, alert. "According to my database, changes in skin pigmentation among the AOEY species often indicate heightened emotional states, particularly when interacting with potential Ma." "That's enough, Lex." Randy cut him off quickly. He didn't need his droid playing xenobiologist right now. "We are here to discuss the charges against you, which are extensive. Multiple counts of piracy, theft of registered vessels, interference with legitimate trade." "Legitimate?" Niara scoffed. "Is that what we're calling slave traders these days?" Randy paused, thrown off script. "Excuse me? Oh, didn't your Rangers mention that detail? Every ship I borrowed was carrying sentient cargo. Illegally, I might add," she said with a shrug. "I simply engaged in a bit of wealth redistribution. The slaves got their freedom, I got paid, and some criminals learned a valuable lesson about karma." "Vigilantism is still a crime," Randy stated, though with less conviction than he intended. "Is it a crime to right wrongs when the law turns a blind eye?" Niara took a step closer to the edge of her containment field. "Tell me, Judge Stone, in your years of serving justice, have you ever questioned whether the law and true justice are always the same thing?" Randy felt heat rise in his cheeks. This was not how interrogations usually went. He was supposed to be the one asking the questions, not defending the entire legal system to a criminal, albeit a fascinating one. "I think we need to focus on the facts of your specific case," he managed to say. "Of course," Niara agreed smoothly. She shifted her weight, and somehow the simple prisoner's jumpsuit seemed to cling even more distractingly to her curves. "I don't suppose I could trouble you for some water. These restraints do make one so thirsty." Against his better judgment, Randy nodded to Lex to provide a cup of water. As Niara reached for it, her fingers brushed against the droid's metallic hand. The cup wobbled, and water splashed across the front of her jumpsuit. Randy's mouth went dry as the fabric clung to her blue skin, which had suddenly become almost translucent. He could see the rapid beat of her heart and the expansion of her lungs as she gasped in mock surprise. "Oh my, how clumsy of me," Niara said, not sounding sorry at all. "I don't suppose you have anything I could change into? This fabric becomes so revealing when wet." That is, Lex, please provide the prisoner with." Randy stumbled over his words, his legendary composure completely shattered. "Judge Stone, your vital signs indicate significant elevation," Lex announced. Heart rate increased by 47%, pupil dilation observed, skin temperature rising. "Shall I call medical assistance?" "No." Randy's voice cracked slightly. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. "That won't be necessary. Let's take a brief recess. Guards, please escort the prisoner back to her cell. We'll resume in 1 hour." As Niara was led away, she glanced over her shoulder with a knowing smile. "I look forward to continuing our discussion, Judge Stone." The doors closed behind her, and Randy slumped in his chair. What had just happened? He had conducted thousands of interviews, faced down the galaxy's worst criminals without flinching. How had one blue-skinned pirate managed to completely upend his carefully ordered world in the span of 10 minutes? "Sir," Lex's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Would you like me to compile a full dossier on AOUI mating behaviors? My databases indicate their courtship rituals can be quite—" "Lex," Randy growled, not another word. As he stared out at the stars, Randy couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be unlike any he'd handled before. Despite his best efforts to deny it, a small part of him was looking forward to their next encounter. He just hoped his heart rate could handle it. Randy spent the next 3 days buried in legal texts, searching for precedents. His usually pristine office was now cluttered with holographic displays showing centuries of intergalactic law. He told himself it was thorough research, not procrastination, before facing Niara again. "Judge Stone," Lex's voice interrupted his reading. "You've been reviewing the same paragraph for 7.3 minutes. Also, your morning appointment is in 47 minutes. Randy glanced at his reflection in a darkened screen. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat brown hair was disheveled. "Right. Thanks, Lex." He headed to his quarters to freshen up. As he reached for his standard robes, his hand hesitated, then moved to the formal judicial attire he usually reserved for high-profile cases. The silk-like material shimmered with iridescence. "An interesting choice, sir," Lex commented as Randy adjusted the robes. "Though perhaps the cologne is excessive." Randy froze, realizing he had indeed reached for his rarely used cologne. "It's protocol for important cases." "Of course, sir." Just as practicing stern expressions in the mirror for 12 minutes this morning was also protocol, Randy shot the droid a glare. "Don't you have some data to process?" The interrogation room felt smaller when Niara was brought in. Her blue skin seemed to glow under the harsh lighting, and her amber eyes found his immediately. "Judge Stone," she practically purred. "New robes? They suit you." Randy cleared his throat. "Let's focus on the matter at hand. Your claims about the slave traders need verification." "Of course." Niara leaned forward, her restraints clinking softly. "Though I must say, that cologne is quite distracting. Is it Earth-made?" "I asked the questions here," Randy managed, fighting a blush. "Now, about the Centauri merchant fleet." What followed was less an interrogation and more of an intricate dance. For every legal query, Niara had a response that was both maddeningly evasive and undeniably flirtatious. She described liberating ships full of enslaved beings, but each tale was interwoven with observations about Randy's eyes or the way his voice deepened when he was trying to be stern. At one point, she stood to better explain a particular raid, only to accidentally drop her datapad. As she bent to retrieve it, Randy found himself forgetting every question he'd prepared. "Your heart rate has increased by 52%, sir," Lex helpfully announced. "Shall I adjust the room temperature?" "That won't be necessary," Randy said through gritted teeth. Days turned into weeks. Randy found himself scheduling more interviews than any case had ever required. He told himself it was thoroughness, even as he spent more time choosing his robes each morning. One afternoon, he arrived to find Niara performing what appeared to be an elaborate dance in her cell. "Sir," Lex's voice held a note of alarm. "My databases indicate this as the Cathra, an ancient AOUI battle ritual typically performed before engaging in combat." Randy's hand moved toward the security alert, but Niara's movements were hypnotic. Her blue skin rippled with cascading patterns as she twisted and turned, each gesture both graceful and suggestive. "Actually," she said, slightly breathless, "it's a traditional courtship dance, though I suppose there are similarities." Her eyes locked with his. Both involve the art of conquest. After all, Randy swallowed hard. "That's hardly appropriate for an official interview." "Oh," Niara smiled. "Then perhaps we should conduct an unofficial one." Her skin flushed a deeper blue. "I promise to answer all your questions thoroughly." "Sir," Lex interjected, "your vital signs suggest—" "Thank you, Lex." Randy cut him off. He needed to regain control of the situation, yet as he watched Niara resume her dance, he couldn't help but feel that control had been slipping away since the moment she entered his courtroom. He couldn't shake the feeling that control had been slipping away since the moment she'd entered his courtroom. Later that evening, as Randy pored over more legal texts, he found his mind wandering to the way Niara's skin had shimmered as she moved. He was startled out of his thoughts by Lex. "Sir, I compiled extensive data on AOUI courtship rituals, should you require it. Though I feel obligated to remind you of the regulations regarding fraternization with defendants." Randy sighed. "Thank you, Lex. That will be all." As his droid left, Randy realized he'd been absent-mindedly drawing patterns in his notes that looked suspiciously like the curves of blue skin. He quickly erased them, but couldn't erase the growing certainty that this case was changing him in ways no law book could have prepared him for. The next morning, as he prepared for another interview, Randy found himself practicing his stern judge expression in the mirror. "If I may, sir," Lex said from the doorway, "your attempt at stoicism might be more convincing if you weren't humming the traditional AOUI courtship melody." Randy felt his face heat up. "I was doing no such thing. My audio receptors recorded 7.2 seconds of it," Lex replied. As they walked to the interrogation room, Randy tried to focus on the serious nature of the charges and his duty to uphold the law. But when the door opened and Niara smiled at him, her skin brightening at his approach, he knew he was in trouble. She had somehow modified her prisoner jumpsuit into something that walked the line between regulation and scandalous. As she moved to sit, her hand brushed his, sending an electric jolt through him that had nothing to do with her restraints. "Judge Stone," she said softly, "have you ever wondered why a supposedly hardened criminal would allow herself to be captured?" Her eyes held his. "Perhaps some prizes are worth surrendering for." As Randy struggled to form a response that wouldn't betray the rapid beating of his heart, he realized that in this dance between them, he wasn't sure who was truly the prisoner anymore. Randy's morning routine was interrupted by Lex bursting into his quarters with uncharacteristic urgency. "Sir, a diplomatic vessel has just docked. It's an AOUI Royal Cruiser." Randy nearly dropped his coffee. "Royal Cruiser? Are you certain?" "Affirmative. They're requesting an immediate audience with the station's ranking judicial officer." "Which would be you, sir." As Randy hurried to make himself presentable, his mind raced. In 5 years as an intergalactic judge, he'd never had contact with AOUI royalty. Their species was notoriously isolationist, preferring to handle their affairs internally. The delegation that swept into his courtroom was a sight to behold. 3 tall AOUI, their blue skin adorned with intricate markings of rank, moved with fluid grace. Their leader, a stern-faced male with deep indigo skin, fixed Randy with piercing golden eyes. "I am High Counselor Zarin of the AOUI Collective," he announced. "We are here about the criminal you're holding. The one who calls herself Niara." Randy's stomach tightened. "Yes, she's awaiting trial for. She is Princess Niara Cavil, heir to the AOUI throne," Zarin interrupted. "And she will be remanded to our custody immediately." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Randy gripped his desk for support. "Princess?" Lex helpfully chimed in, accessing updated files. "Confirmed. Prisoner 7249, aka the Azure Shadow, matches facial recognition for Princess Niara Cavil of the AOUI Collective, who disappeared 6 standard months ago, shortly before her arranged marriage to—" "That's quite enough," Zarin cut in. "This is an internal AOUI matter. We have an extradition treaty. You will release her to us." Randy found his voice. "With respect, High Counselor, she's charged with crimes in our jurisdiction. The legal process must be followed." Zarin's skin darkened ominously. "Perhaps you misunderstand. This isn't a request." The tense standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Niara herself, escorted by guards. She took in the scene with a slight smile. "Hello, Father. Lovely of you to visit." The High Counselor turned to his daughter. "Your little adventure is over. It's time to return home and fulfill your duties." "You mean marry someone I've never met to secure a trade agreement?" Niara's voice was light, but Randy caught the steel underneath it. "It is your duty as princess. And what of my duty to justice?" She gestured to Randy. "Judge Stone here has been showing me that true justice transcends political convenience." Randy felt the weight of multiple sets of alien eyes on him. He straightened his spine. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my chambers. All of us." What followed was the most surreal negotiation of Randy's career. As Niara and her father argued about duty and freedom, Randy found himself poring over legal texts, searching for a solution that didn't end with him either starting an interstellar incident or sending the woman he was increasingly certain he was falling for to her death. Randy was increasingly certain he was falling for Niara, but the law had to be upheld. "The law must be upheld," Zarin insisted. "Which law?" Niara challenged. "The one that forces me into a loveless marriage, or the one that would execute me for freeing slaves?" Randy's eyes fell on an obscure subsection of an ancient legal code. His heart began to race as he read it carefully. "There may be a third option," he said slowly. "There's a precedent, rarely invoked but still valid. The judgment of rehabilitation." All eyes turned to him as he explained. "Instead of execution, a convicted criminal could be sentenced to rehabilitative service under the direct supervision of a high-ranking judicial officer. The original intent had been to reform young offenders, but the language was broad enough." "Absolutely not." Zarin bristled. "A princess reduced to some sort of judicial apprentice?" "Actually," Niara's eyes sparkled as she looked at Randy, "I rather like the idea. What better way to learn about justice than from an expert?" "Sir," Lex interjected, "may I point out that your heart rate has increased by 62% since the princess entered the room?" "Thank you, Lex." Randy managed through gritted teeth. After hours of negotiation, a compromise was reached. Niara would serve as Randy's judicial apprentice for 1 standard year. If she showed sufficient rehabilitation, both her criminal charges and her royal obligations would be suspended. As the royal delegation prepared to depart, Zarin pulled Randy aside. "I hope you know what you're doing, Judge Stone. My daughter can be challenging." Randy thought of amber eyes and blue skin that changed colors with emotion. "I'm counting on it, High Counselor." 3 months later, Randy sat at his desk, watching Niara argue a complex point of interstellar law. She had traded her prisoner jumpsuit for modified judicial robes that somehow managed to look both professional and alluring. Her blue skin glowed with passion as she gestured at holographic displays. Therefore, the precedent clearly supports a more nuanced interpretation of sentient rights, she said. Randy tried to focus on her legal argument rather than the way her skin shimmered when she got excited. You make a compelling case, Apprentice Cable. She smiled. That smile that still made his heart race. I had an excellent teacher, though I'm still not sure about all these robes. On my world, judges were much less. Sir, Lex interrupted, station sensors indicate your body temperature has risen by 2.3 degrees. Randy shot his droid a glare. Don't you have somewhere else to be, Lex? Negative. My primary function is to assist you, though my databases suggest that my presence may be inhibiting certain biological. That will be all. Niara laughed, a sound that still sent shivers down Randy's spine. Your droid is very thorough, though his statistics on our productivity might be concerning. Oh! Randy raised an eyebrow. According to his latest report, our efficiency has decreased by 23% since I began my rehabilitation. Randy felt his face heat up. Well, However, she continued, moving closer, her skin deepening to that particular shade of blue he had come to recognize. He also notes that your oxytocin levels have increased by 156%. She was very close now. Randy could see the subtle patterns in her skin, the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. Niara, She silenced him with a kiss that made his head spin and his heart race. When they finally parted, her skin was glowing with an inner light he'd never seen before. I believe, she whispered against his lips, that's what humans call a mistrial. 1 year later, Randy stood before the Intergalactic Judicial Council, Niara at his side. They presented their proposal for a comprehensive reform of the slave trade laws, the culmination of months of work and, yes, a few distractions. As Niara argued their case, her modified judicial robe swirling around her still blue skin, Randy felt a familiar surge of pride and something else. Something that made his heart race just as much as it had the first day she'd walked into his courtroom. Lex, standing quietly in the corner, made a small noise that might have been a sigh. I've had to completely rewrite my protocols on workplace relationships. Though I must admit, the data suggests an overall positive outcome. Randy smiled. Sometimes the best judgments came from the heart. Well. You've made it through our little cosmic courtroom drama without succumbing to the urge to commandeer the nearest starship and set a course for the AOY homeworld. Bravo! I hope you enjoyed this tale of love, law, and starlit justice as much as Judge Stone enjoyed those suspiciously well-fitting prisoner jumpsuits. As I penned this interstellar legal rom-com, I couldn't help but wonder if I should have included a disclaimer. Warning. May cause sudden urges to read the fine print of intergalactic treaties. After all, you never know when you might need to invoke an obscure judgment of rehabilitation clause to wiggle out of an arranged marriage or a pesky death sentence. It's all in a day's work when you're juggling space piracy and royal obligations. Speaking of juggling, let's take a moment to appreciate our dear friend Lex. That poor, long-suffering droid went from processing legal briefs to processing hormone levels faster than you can say objection overruled. I hear he's currently in therapy, learning to cope with his newfound role as an unwilling relationship counselor. Maybe we should start a support group. Droids Dealing with Romantic Humans Anonymous. And let's not forget the true hero of our story, the color blue. Who knew that cerulean skin could be so captivating? Fashion designers across the galaxy are probably scrambling right now to replicate that seductive space pirate chic look. Just remember, folks, if you're an AOUI trying to keep a low profile, maybe stick to text messaging. In space, no one can hear you flirt, but they can definitely see your skin changing colors. I hope this little adventure has inspired you to look at your local courthouse in a whole new light. Who knows? That stern-looking judge might just be one blue-skinned space pirate away from a complete existential crisis. And the next time you're facing a parking ticket, just remember, it could be worse. You could be negotiating interspecies marriage contracts while dodging slave trader accusations. So, dear listener, as you drift off to sleep tonight, dreaming of starlit courtrooms and judicial robes that somehow manage to look alluring, remember this. In the grand cosmic courtroom of life, we're all just trying to avoid a mistrial of the heart. Sweet dreams, and may all your future legal entanglements be just as romantic and considerably less likely to spark an interstellar incident. Cosmic love and judicial kisses. P.S. If you happen to see any suspicious blue shadows lurking around your local spaceport, just smile and walk away. Some pirate princesses prefer to stay incognito, at least until the sequel.